Today, I'm looking for a bridge. Not any old kind of bridge. It's a river bridge, and I've driven over it hundreds of times. Our story starts here, or should that be it ends here? I'm in the seaside coastal town of Littlehampton, and this is the harbour. Underneath me is the River Arun, which runs out into the English Channel. The source is about 18 miles that way, up north. Today, Littlehampton is a holiday resort, with beaches, hotels, pleasure arcades, shops, and occasionally even sunshine. Originally, this Anglo-Saxon fishing village was simply called Hampton, but sailors in the 14th century added the little bit so as not to confuse it with the bigger harbour at Southampton. Up until the 1820s, it was the second most important harbour on the River Arun, and in 1853, Littlehampton officially became classed as a town. Well, here's a bridge. This is the Littlehampton footbridge. Now that's quite important because it stretches across the River Arun, allowing people to get across. But it actually replaced the 1908 more intriguing Littlehampton swing bridge, which was even more exciting because it would swing about 90 degrees to allow some of the bigger boats access to the river. And not only that, down to the estuary so they could get to the channel. Well, prior to that, there would have been a chain ferry. That's like a wooden boat with a guy on it, pulling on an old chain that would have been swung across the river. Well, that's no longer here, sadly. Neither is the swing bridge. But even if they were, they would have been far too young. The bridge I'm looking for is 600 years, remember? I think we're going to have to go further upstream. Right, I've travelled about 7 miles north now from Littlehampton, and I've arrived in Arundel. It's an old town, boasts a famous castle. It has tea rooms, antique shops and all sorts of various tourist attractions. It was, at one time, a very important port, and up until the 1930s, right here, there would have been tall ships sailing in, ready to unload their cargo. Well, it's difficult to imagine that these days. But how did they turn them round so they could sail them out again, I wonder? Well, this is the road bridge into Arundel. It's a beautiful old bridge. Originally, bridges crossing rivers like the Arun here would have been made of timber, and they would have been fairly substantial and done a good job. The only problem with wood and water is that the two mixed together, well, eventually one starts to rot. And it's not the water that rots, it's the wood. So, in around 1724, they came up with a different solution, and they built a nice stone bridge. Now, this one, it says on the plaque on the wall over there, was rebuilt in MCM XXXV, whatever that works out to be. Well, here you can see inlaid into the actual wall of the bridge here, the original stone, which down the bottom here has actually got the date 1724. So I feel vindicated really that my research seems to be fairly accurate. With the castle stronghold being important to the Normans in Arundel in 1068 when it was built, timber and masonry needed to be transported to the port, and the River Arun was the perfect vehicle.
It flourished as a port with an array of goods and building materials and merchandise being loaded and unloaded on its busy quayside.
So as old and delightful as it is, it's still not old enough. So we need to go further upriver. That's Pulborough Bridge. Not quite as old as the one I'm going to take you to. Fairly old nonetheless. You know, it must have been quite relaxing, sitting there by the river, watching the traffic go up and down. As far as moving cargo is concerned, the canals and rivers would have offered great reliability, as far back as the Romans, right through to the Saxon and Norman occupation, and up to the 18th and 19th centuries. Because the roads, let's face it, in those days were pretty grim. They were bleak, all right on foot perhaps, or on horseback, and maybe for a small coach. But anything else, hopeless. Of course, when the toll gates came in and the turnpikes, they improved a little bit, but so much better by river.
The River Arun, curiously, was originally known as the Tarrant, and it was really only accessible inland by boat for about 10 miles to just north of Pulborough at a place called Pallingham. So, in 1816, a canal was built to join up with the River Wey, which in turn linked up to the River Thames and so into London. Much forgotten now, it was London's southern route to the sea.
The Arun and Wey Canal only lasted for 55 years. In 1871 it closed, but it is being restored now, and maybe that's something else that I could go and explore in one of these videos. Right, this is the 283 I'm driving on, and I'm heading up to Stopham. We've just come through Pulborough. We're now about 10 miles up really from Littlehampton, where we started, and somewhere along here is the old bridge. Thing is, I'm gonna find it. Well, this is close to the bridge. I used to drive across it when I was a young man, about 20 years ago. We are between Pulborough, back this way, Petworth, about 5 miles back that way, and this is close to the village of Stopham. The bridge, I hear, has been bypassed since I was last this way, so the last time I went on it you could actually drive on it, but now, no longer. Let's see if we can find it. Well, this is Stopham Bridge, modern, as it is today. Cars flying across it, well, not at the moment, or maybe, if we're lucky. Pretty unremarkable. But then, I didn't bring you all this way to see this bridge. The bridge I brought you to see is 600 years old, and it's that away. There it is.
Stopham Bridge is probably one of the best-loved bridges in West Sussex. It was built in 1423 in the time of King Henry VI and replaced an earlier wooden bridge that was erected in 1309. It's constructed from local stone and boasts 7 arches, with the central one slightly taller than the others, and there's a reason for that, as we shall see.
Beautiful, isn't it? I love it. I just can't believe it really is 600 years old. I mean, it's so sturdy and strong, and it's just really lovely. Of course, it wasn't always here, and prior to that, here on the River Arun, this area here would have just been a fort. Now, By ford, of course, I'm not talking about a car, I'm talking about a point in the river that's shallow enough to wade through. Now the trouble with that is, of course, people just didn't want to get wet. So, just like in Littlehampton, there would have been a ferry. Not a chain ferry, a man with a little boat, rowing you across. Quite what your horses had to do. I expect they just had to wade through and get wet. But that wouldn't have been very satisfactory for the farmers and their wagons, people who were droving their sheep to Petworth to the market. Or what about the coaches and horses and the lords and ladies? No. So, in 1309, they built here, in its place, a timber bridge. So Stopham Bridge is near Stopham. Stopham, of course, a small village about half a mile to the north here. And it's got its beautiful manor house, its Saxon church and a clutch of very lovely cottages. But if you were the landed gentry and you wanted to live around here, you'd probably keep away from the riff-raff of the village, and you might put a house here at Ford Place, which is right next to the river, right next to the ford, in fact. It's now called Stopham House, and I can't actually take you in there because, well, they might set the dogs on me. We don't want that, do we? Originally, it was owned by one John of Stopham, or Stopham, Ham being the Saxon name for village. But later on, it was owned by the Bartelot family, who've been here for ages. Well, in 1423, they built the Stopham Stone Bridge, the Seven-Arch Bridge, and it's been here ever since. Incredible. Look at this. It's absolutely fantastic. This is medieval craftsmanship at its best. It just fits all so well together. I mean, I defy that modern construction can produce something this good and last this long. It's just incredible.
So just how did those medieval builders build such a solid bridge back in the early 1400s? It wouldn't have been easy. First, the base foundations needed to be put into position and the central piers aligned. The arches would have been constructed one at a time and in sequence until the river had been spanned. With the rigid road surface and finishing touches and plenty of sweat and elbow grease, you'd finally have your bridge.
Well, that's not the whole story. Do you remember I told you about the Arun and Way Canal? Well, that was about 2 miles up north. So the sail barges would come in here and they would get to the bridge and it would be too narrow. They wouldn't be able to get through. So, in 1822, they took away the centre arch and they raised it up a bit. That way, they could get through. Ingenious, isn't it? The best thing about this bridge, of course, is there's a pub on the end, and I believe they do a wonderful ham, egg and chips. And not only that, they serve real ale. So that's where I'm going next. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.